This is from the Daily Wire. It says, parents of students attending Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School in Manhattan were furious after the school forced students to take an explicit class on pornography without parental consent, of course. The school at first denied hosting the workshop, then later apologized. The class, which involved a slideshow and a lecture by an instructor, featured raunchy images and presentations on porn genres and OnlyFans, a subscription website used largely for pornography. The New York Post detailed the workshop. Let's see how much of this I can actually read. The often explicit slide presentation and lecture by, the person's name is Fonte, Justine Ang Fonte is the lecturer. The presentation lecture by Fonte to the 120 boys and girls included lessons on how porn takes care of 3 big male vulnerabilities, statistics on the orgasm gap, showing straight women have far fewer orgasms with their partners than gay men or women, and photos of partially nude women, some in bondage to analyze what is porn and what is art. Fonte's presentation, some of which was seen by the Post, included a list of the most searched pornographic terms of 2019, including, and now there are a bunch of things that I know I can't read on the air. One slide cited various porn genres, such as incest-themed, consensual, barely legal, and kink and BDSM. The workshop was designed and taught by Justine Ang Fonte, the health director at Dalton, another top prep school. And by the way, I looked up her bio, and her bio says that she's, on Twitter anyway, says she's a passionate she-they health educator fighting for a more sex-positive world. So that's what's happening at that school. I mean, this is a slightly more grotesque and explicit version of the kind of sex ed that you find in schools all across the country. So you might say, well, yeah, this is some fancy school in New York. A bunch of far-left wackos are there, mostly far-left wackos sending their kids there. Of course, this is happening there. It's not happening in my kid's school. They would never do that. I wouldn't be so sure. This is, again, slightly more explicit than if your kid is 16 years old and is in a public school, they've probably had a lesson similar to this, maybe slightly more toned down. Because that's what sex ed is. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of sex ed in school now. What they call comprehensive sex education. That's the term of art for it. So if your kid's been through a quote-unquote comprehensive sex education course, they've been through stuff like this. Which is why I have always said that, and this should have been our argument all along. It shouldn't have been, let's reform sex ed, or let's make sure there's parental consent before, or any of that. Our argument all along should have been, none of this should be taught in school at all. Yes, there should be no sex ed in school at all. Nothing called sex ed. We want to teach about human reproduction? Great. That's for science. We want to talk about the body parts and how they function? Fantastic. Well, there are classes for that. Anatomy, that's anatomy, that's biology. So I'm not saying that the school should overlook the scientific facts of human reproduction entirely. No. Although we're getting to a point now where I don't trust the school to teach those subjects either, because who knows what they're telling kids about how do you determine a male from a female and that kind of thing. But in an ideal scenario, yeah, obviously you're going to teach that stuff in school because these are scientific facts. But there is no reason why the school should go beyond that at all. We don't need to get into any of your trying to shape how kids view sexuality, giving them advice on how to engage in it, when to engage in it. None of that. As a teacher, your own personal moral and ethical views on these subjects, none of that should be in the school. It's not the place for it. That should have been our message all along on the right, but it wasn't. And so now you end up with this kind of thing. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is that, the schools believe that they have total control over your kids, and that they are more, that their moral claim to your children supersedes your own because they're the educators. And you're sending your kid to them for 6 or 7 hours a day. And so they really believe, most of the people running these schools across the country, they really believe that as a parent, it's actually none of your business what's happening at school. If your kid comes out as transgender at school and all the teachers know it, it's none of your business. They don't have to tell you that. That's the attitude. And so when you send your kid into school, that's what you're encountering. That's what they're encountering, I should say. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.